Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And to all of those that are viewing the meeting remotely, I am Christy Biggerstaff, the Director of Early Literacy for the Kentucky Department of Education. And with me are representatives of KDE in the Office of Teaching and Learning, the Chief Academic Officer, Mickey Marinelli, also the Assistant Director of Early Literacy, Ashley Hill, and the MTSS Early Literacy Consultant, Jan Sellers. Before I begin, I have a few announcements on conducting virtual meetings. This meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meeting Act. Accordingly, members of the Grant Steering Committee must ensure their video is streaming and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Members, please mute your microphone when not talking. However, all discussions must be broadcast to the public. Therefore, be sure your microphone is not on mute when you speak. Every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and take a short pause. That will give the software time to recognize you. And for any items that require a vote, a roll call will be necessary to record the vote of each committee member, which at the time the member should state his or her name, pause, and say, I vote yes or I vote no. At this moment, it doesn't look like we have enough available to actually have a quorum. So this is going to be more of an informational meeting today. I've had a few people to reach out and say they were sick and not able to join. So hopefully we will reconvene in the spring and take care of some business. In the meantime, I'm just going to jump right into information. And the first order of business is some Division of Early Literacy updates. So excited to talk about all the work that is happening there. So we have conducted a review period, or at least a submission period, for the early literacy assessment reviews. So the technical team that is working with me will be reviewing those in the upcoming months. I believe we had around 7 new submissions for this year, and that, of course, is our early literacy assessments with our universal screener and diagnostic assessment. The review window actually is from now until the end of January. And then in February, if any of those submissions for universal screeners or diagnostics are approved and meet all of our criteria, that those new assessments will be added to our webpage on before or at February 7th, 2025. So again, we want to keep those up to date. We want to review those constantly to ensure that they are meeting our criteria that we set forth, and are looking forward to looking at those new assessment submissions. I wanted to kind of give you some updates around the work that has been happening. We are in our third cohort of letters training. So we have over 6,000 participants that have been trained with letters, and that's either letters for educators or letters for administrators. We offer Dale office hours as well to support specifically the administrators that are working through the Letters for Administrators program, professional learning, and that is going well. That is on the second Tuesday of each month, but I will say, and we've opened this up to anyone. So if you would like to participate in Dale office hours, if you have questions about Read to Succeed, literacy HQIRs, the letters, professional learning, anything like that, you're welcome to drop in it's in the morning hours on the second Tuesday of each month, and we would love to support you and have you to ask any questions you might have. So if you would like that specific information, please reach out to me and I can give you those specific dates. We also have a new network. It's the Kentucky Early Literacy Leadership Network, and we have 33 districts that are participating in that network from western, central, and eastern part of our state. And they are working through, of course, information through Read to Succeed and building out sustainable models and HQIR implementation. That work is going really well, and just proud of the districts that are putting in the work in that network. As part of that network, we also are offering them specific high-quality instructional resource cohorts. So that could be, we offer a variety, but like CKLA, Amplify CKLA, if they're working through that Tier 1 curriculum, then they join that cohort, and those happen in the afternoon. and we have it for a variety of curriculums. We also have offered them a secondary science of reading course to the network participants. We know that is a need in our state. I have people reach out to me every time we open up a new cohort of letters that are middle school and high school teachers, and they say, I have students that are sitting in my classroom that needs help with reading. So we know that is definitely a need. We're trying to help and support our secondary educators in that way. So excited about offering that. We also have launched officially a statewide literacy coaching model this year. Our coaches are inside 23 partnership schools throughout the state. Those schools were chosen based on the greatest need. We looked at third grade reading Kentucky Summative Assessment scores and reached out to them and said, would you be willing to partner with us? And we could give you a literacy coach to help build out sustainability, professional learning, working with PLCs to help your teachers put literacy best practices within their classrooms and really coach those teachers and work alongside of them to help build out those sustainable models. So that all is going really well, and I'll share some specific data about that literacy coaching model here in just a few minutes. We are going to open that up to hire some more literacy coaches soon, because we know there is great need within our state of helping to build out literacy. We also have added on regional principal support leaders, and they are working right now with our Kentucky Ellen, as we call our network, principals, and we ask those leaders within the Kentucky Ellen network, would you like someone to help support you and partner with you to work alongside of you to lead literacy within your buildings? So we had several principals in that network to take them up on that partnership. So they are working with them currently, and we hope, as well as our partnership schools in the future, to work with leaders that are willing to partner with us too. And then I kind of wanted to put this date on your radar. The Kentucky Read Succeed Summer Conference, that's a mouthful, is happening again next year. We had our first one this past summer in June, and it went amazingly well. So we've got another one coming up. June will be here, even though we're all freezing and cold today. June will be here hopefully in a blink of an eye. So that will happen in Louisville this year, June 13th, 2025. So wanted to put that date. That is a free summer conference to Kentucky public school educators and administrators, and we hope everybody takes advantage of that. I also wanted to let this group know, because they will be a part of our meetings in the future. So we have a new statewide reading research center, and it's being established at U of L, the University of Louisville, under the leadership of Dr. Amy Lingo. So Mickey has been working with them to get all of that set up and started. So hopefully they will be present at our meeting next fall to give updates around their work to this committee. So that's exciting, joining them and partnering with them. And this is the data that I was talking about with our early literacy coaches. So our coaches that are working with the schools are doing coaching cycles. And of course, they do observations and give feedback. So at this point, this data is already a couple of months old, but very excited to see the numbers on the screen that, we are having over 1,300 classroom observations have already happened with our partnership schools. They are having loads of feedback conversations. They're executing coaching cycles, and they're leading PLCs as well. So excited about their work, excited about all the things that's going on with our partnership schools, and know that we're going to just keep adding data to that as our work goes along. Something I didn't say earlier that I wanted to say is we are hoping to partner with our partnership schools 3 to 5 years at least, because we know that to build out sustainability and capacity, it's going to take some time. So, we don't want to be just a one and done and pull out and go somewhere else. So we are hoping that they stay with those partnership schools 3 to 5 years, if those schools will have us, so we can really make sure that we build out that sustainability. I also wanted to kind of alert the group that we do have a new KYCL 25 grant out there, and that is going to be coming to a close soon. So the RFA should be submitted by December the 18th. So I know a lot of finalizing grant applications are happening now. So we anticipate funding approximately 40 districts, and that's a 4-year grant or a 4-year award. For small districts, it would be over $1 million. You can see there on the screen. Medium districts over $1 million, and then large districts is 1.5. So excited to be able to offer that to districts, and this that would fund a multitude of things, specifically high quality instructional resources and professional learning based around those. So that is closing soon. And then I just wanted to also highlight some of the early literacy resources we have on our early literacy webpage. And one that I always point to that I feel like is a foundational literacy resource is that key actions for meeting the needs of all K through 3 readers and writers. And I told a group of superintendents that I was talking to earlier in the week that I have a ham story, and I'll spare you from that story too. But a lot of times we cook things, our parents might teach us a specific skill and they teach us the way they were taught. So sometimes we as educators teach the way we're taught at times. So a lot of the practices that I specifically did as a 4th and 5th grade reading teacher, I didn't know any better, but now I know that some of those practices that I had in my classroom needed to be changed based on the science. So I wanted to tell you about that resource. I think it's a great one, and if you're interested, you can check it out. And I think that is it from me, but I will open it up to maybe any questions that you all have or anything that you would like to say about the Division of Early Literacy and the updates. All right. I'm not great at wait time, so I'm gonna go on, and I'm gonna hand it off to Jan Sellers. Jan is the MTSS and early literacy consultant and truly an expert in this space, and I'm so grateful for her on a daily basis. She is a true thought partner for me. She helped us to develop the reading improvement plan template. So she is the source. So if you have any questions about the reading improvement plan, I'm sure Jan would open up that opportunity at some point during this presentation. But again, thankful for her brilliant mind and her partnership, and happy to have her with this committee today. So Jan, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Christy. Thanks for those kind words. Well, as Christy said, my name is Jan Sellers. I think I want to say hi to Sam Sands. I've worked with her in Woodford County, so it's always nice to see a familiar face. Really today, I wanted to spend some time giving you an overview of the reading improvement plan. We've had some questions and people requesting some more information. And so really my plan today is to take us through some of the key requirements in the legislation, and then take a high-level look at the reading improvement plan resource that we developed to support our districts and schools. And so really just starting today, from the definition, you can see that our goal is really for them to develop a plan that's going to accelerate a student's rate of progress toward proficiency in reading. And so, areas of need will be identified through an approved, valid, and reliable diagnostic assessment. And really our intent with the plan is for us to be able to intentionally support students with the knowledge and the skills at the level of intensity that they need for each situation. So, very individualized. And starting from that perspective, I want to talk about a few of the key requirements in the plan that we used when we built out the template. And so really starting from that concept of collaborative teaming. And the reading improvement plan is developed and implemented by a reading improvement team. And as you can see, the membership is defined in statute, and we have certain members that need to be included. Parents or the guardians do need to be a member and part of that problem solving process. We also want to make sure, of course, that the general education teacher or teachers are represented and they're the experts. They have the knowledge of the high quality instructional resources that are being used in the school and just good information about student performance on a day-to-day basis. It's really critical that we have somebody on that team who's knowledgeable, not only about the high quality instructional resources being used, but the availability of the evidence-based resources of the district or school. And so that is a critical member of the team and role for someone to play. And then, of course, for any students that have an English language service plan or an individual education plan, we want to make sure that that certified teacher of that student is represented as well. So when we look at these members, also always encourage our schools to think about the roles that people might play as well. It's very important not only to have that person knowledgeable about the literacy resources, but it's also helpful if you have someone that's knowledgeable about the assessments and the data and how to analyze data that we're going to be using to make the decisions throughout the process. Another set of key requirements, we are required to use valid and reliable universal screening and diagnostic assessments. KDE developed a criterion and a submission process for our approved list to ensure that those assessments that are being used do have the validity to measure what they say they're going to measure, and also that they have a consistency of scores and accurately classify risk. We want to make sure that our team are selecting those interventions that have the highest probability for being effective for the students that the target areas for the student at the intensity that they need it. And then, of course, we want to make sure we have a plan in place from the very beginning of how we're going to monitor that progress to make sure we are accelerating student performance toward proficiency in reading. Of course, we want to make sure our parents, as part of the process, are informed of the student progress, and we want to make sure that they're provided with the information to be able to support the student at home based on the target areas that have been identified through that Read at Home plan. The other key piece when we think about creating a reading improvement plan, it's really important that we look at it from the perspective of team-based database decision-making. We want to make sure we're using a consistent problem-solving process that is grounded in the strengths of a continuous improvement model. So we recommend a 4-step problem-solving model. It's one that's very familiar to most people, and we want to think about the data that's used in each step of the process, to not only identify what is the problem, but if there is a problem. And so those universal screenings are going to be critical for being able to identify students potentially at risk. Then we need to be able to analyze deeper and look for root causes through the data that we get through the diagnostic assessments. How we're selecting those interventions that we are implementing, what are we going to do about that problem that we identified? And then making sure that we have that continuous cycle of review so that we, again, are being able to accelerate that student progress and make adjustments to our plans as needed so that we don't wait too long to determine that something didn't work by only collecting that data at the end of a year. So that's going to drive every piece of the development of the reading improvement plan. And so we're going to look at the reading improvement plan resource, and I'm going to walk you through that database decision making that would happen in each section of that plan. So section 1 is pretty self-explanatory. Mickey, were you going to say something? Okay. Section 1, pretty self-explanatory. We have a spot where we identify, the student and that identifying information. We have a spot where we're making sure that those required members are part of the team. We also recommend that when we're looking at the teams, that schools consider their existing teaming structures, because one of the important things is to provide coherence and alignment among these various initiatives that we've adopted. And so if schools already have a student intervention team structure in place, that team can serve the purpose of a reading improvement team as long as those members required in the statute are present. And so that's something we always want to try to remind our districts and schools so that we can provide that coherence and we're not setting up a whole new teaming structure that's doing things in isolation and duplicating work that's happening. Then the next section, we do want to encourage people to look at it from a strengths-based model. So our first step is identifying where the student is at benchmark or above benchmark in reading. And so we'll use that information from the diagnostic to talk about those areas where the student is performing well. We also encourage our schools to think about even other academic areas or non-academic areas in that discussion about student strengths. And then the last part of this section is where we use the information from the diagnostic to determine the areas of reading where that potential problem is occurring. So section 2 is really where the hard work happens. This is where we're going to use the information from the universal screener and diagnostic and that problem-solving model to create the plan. So I'm going to take you through each one of those columns and talk about what happens at each stage of the process. So the first column is where we really identify the problem. So we want to be able to define the problem with precision. This is really the most powerful step in the creation of the reading improvement plan. It's going to drive the rest of everything that we do. And so if we get this right, and again, it's a hypothesis based on the data that we have available, but we would have the information we need to set the goal, select the intervention that matches the problem, and be able to determine how we're going to monitor progress. And so how do we start? We start with analyzing the data from the universal screener because that's going to show if a student is at risk. And so we're looking at that discrepancy between the student's performance and the expected performance. And that level of difference or gap is going to help us determine the intensity of the need. So is it a low risk? Is it a some risk? Is it a high risk potential? And it's strictly an indicator of risk. We don't use the universal screeners for anything else except an indicator. And based on that indicator, which needs to have that validity and reliability component to it, also needs to be have classification accuracy. We want to be confident that if a universal screener says a student's at risk, that student is not under or over identifying the risk levels. Then step 2 is where we move into that analyze step of the problem solving process. We're going to kind of dig deeper into the diagnostic data to determine what some potential root causes are. And I'm going to take us a little bit deeper into the diagnostic assessments. Those were given to, again, not all students like the universal screener. Remember, the universal screener is just casting the net. We want to be able to say anyone who is at risk, what more information do we need? And so we're going to give them to give the diagnostic to anyone below or scoring at risk. We want to, of course, make sure they're valid and reliable. They need to be able to give us a measure of the student's skills against some established performance level. So typically you will see things like criterion referenced assessments. A lot of the literacy tasks and checklist type diagnostics will use a criterion. Or you may see scaled scores or percentile ranks where we're going to be comparing the student's performance against similar age peers. So we want to make sure whatever we're using diagnostically has that performance level established. And then we want to make sure that we have enough information to diagnose that student in a specific area of reading. So once we've once we have determined and targeted that area or areas that we want to focus on, we need to set a goal. We need to know the target that we are expecting our students to reach. So typically we'll use a middle or the end of the year grade level benchmark for a narrow skill we've identified, or perhaps a more general outcome reading measure. Those are always, those benchmarks are part of the information that we have when we, from those assessment tools that we select. So they're easy to use, the tools providing that benchmark to us. It will track the student's progress toward grade level expectation, which is what we want to be able to do. But I did want to talk about a caveat here, because sometimes it may not be appropriate to set a grade level benchmark for a student who is significantly below the benchmark. So when we have students that are at the 5th or 10th percentile, We know that to accelerate progress, we need to get the highest intensity and the most effective interventions that we have. But that slope is so steep that to be able to make that progress in 1 year's time can frankly be demotivating. It's not always realistic, and I think it can be demotivating for the student as well as the teacher. And so we need an alternate way to be able to set a growth goal. So most of our tools that we have on our approved list will offer a way to set what's called an ambitious growth goal. And we take that information that's based on the research on that assessment that says if a student meets or exceeds an ambitious but realistic goal within 2 years, they will be on track toward proficiency. So we know our most intensive needs are going to take longer to be on track. But if we set an ambitious but realistic goal, we will put them on a path to proficiency. And so just for example, iReady uses, they call it a stretch goal. NWEA calls it inspirational goals. A lot of other will use something like ambitious, but you can find that information, and that's why it's so critical for some member of the team to have knowledge about assessment to help guide the team when they're setting goals. I'm going to go through the next two columns of the plan and then give you a minute to process and ask me some questions about the development. I know I'm kind of throwing a lot out here at you at once, but the next stage is again critical. We need, now that we know what our problem is, we know what the target we want that student to meet is, what are we going to do about it? And so it's very important that we select those interventions that have the highest probability of being effective and are aligned to that target, that area that we have targeted for improvement. We also want to see if we can get as close to the contextual fit of our school as possible. So, was this intervention effective for students like ours? This part of the plan is where we need to have a brief description so that anybody could pick up that student record and be able to implement the plan that we've designed. And so we want a brief description of the areas and the domains that it targets. We want to know who's delivering the intervention. Some interventions require the expertise of a certified teacher, someone with that expertise in knowledge of literacy. Some can be administered with training by a paraprofessional. So we want to, again, know who needs to be the deliverer. Typically, the more intense the need, the higher level of experience and certification for the interventionist. And then we want to determine the intensity based on the intensity of the student's need. Typically, the group size, the smaller the group size, the more intensive the intervention, the more frequent, the longer duration of a session, the more intense the intervention. So all that needs to be determined and be aligned to the intervention that the team has chosen. And then the final step in developing the plan is related to, I got ahead of myself. When we think about things that will help the team in determining the intervention, I think there needs to be some things in place ahead of time because there's just a lot that we need them to be able to know and be able to do when they're selecting an effective intervention. So in addition to that team member who's knowledgeable about the availability of the resources, it's really helpful if they have done an inventory of the resources that they have. And if you'll click one more time, Christy, there's a way you can make an inventory with what you have, what domains of reading it covers, a brief description that's going to include, the group size, the frequency, the duration, the level of evidence associated with it, because we know that the more intense the need, the higher level of evidence we want. We don't have time to waste on interventions that are just not going to be effective. And then we also want to be able to know, what training is involved with it, those requirements for the interventionist, and then is it suitable for that more supplemental intervention that's not as intense, or is it for our students with the most intensive needs? So if a team has a menu like this in front of them, it's so much easier to make a determination about what will be effective based on their targeted behavior and the goal of which they want the student to meet. Now we'll move to the last part of the plan. And that's where we want to make sure that we have some plan in place to monitor not only the implementation of the intervention, but the impact. And sometimes we forget about planning this up front. And so it's just critical that we do. So how are we going to monitor the progress of the student? And very often you will see curriculum-based assessments used. And the reason that is they meet some critical criteria of a progress monitor. They are sensitive to change. They will specify minimum growth, so acceptable growth. So we know when a student grows so many words correct per week that there is a minimum that is required to be considered an acceptable level. They have enough alternate forms that we're not assessing on the same tool, same assessment every time we administer it. And they should have validity and reliability for their performance scores. So those are some look-fors when we are looking at what we want to use to progress monitor the student. Of course, it needs to be matched to that identified target behavior. And then we also want to measure how well we implemented it. You know, were there any confounding factors that impacted the implementation? And so going ahead and setting up how we will monitor that ahead of time is just really critical. So checklists are great to use. You can use a checklist that is aligned to the critical components of an intervention. The interventionist can self-report. It's very accurate. You could get information through an interview or observations using that checklist. So you're able to find out, were they able to administer all components of the intervention as it was designed? Did anything impact that? Also checking attendance, you know, was the student there? Was there attendance with the interventionist? You know, was the intervention canceled, session canceled because of too many every Friday because of assemblies? You just never know what could impact student outcomes. And so having that information when you meet back to review is really helpful for the team. And then the summary section of this section 2 just gives us a spot where we can determine when we're going to start it. What's the duration? So is it a 16-week, a 20-week intervention? What is it? How is it determined to be implemented? And then how frequent will it be? Will it be a 3-time-a-week, 20-minute intervention? Is it more intensive, like 5 times a week for 30 minutes? So we just need to know, summarize that. And then the last piece, again, tends to get forgotten, and that is that frequency of progress monitoring. We really want to balance the frequency of progress monitoring with our goal of not wasting instructional time on interventions that are not working. So we really recommend for students that are getting a supplemental or tier 2 intervention that is monitored at least every other week. It could be monitored monthly, but again, thinking about the time that will pass before you'll have enough information to make a determination is just critical. And then for those students with the most intensive needs, we would encourage weekly data collection to the extent possible. So I'm going to pause here for a minute before we move into the section 3 and just give you a minute to process, ask me questions, or for any comments that you may have.
I do have a question. Looking at, we just took our second round of already. And so these kids are somewhat tested out and they're no longer a concern. Is this, remind me if this plan is a year long no matter what, or once we kind of hit that target, we can drop this off?
It's a really good question, Sam. I think that there are a couple of considerations that you would want to make. I would look at all of your data. So I think the team needs to come back and they look at the iReady. But again, it's a universal screener. So it's not going to be as sensitive to pick up some of the nuances of skills that may be missing. So I would look at that data in conjunction with the progress monitoring data you have on the student, because that's going to be more targeted to the skill you identified, to see, did the student reach their goal? Because you used some information from a diagnostic that was more sensitive to identifying a skill deficit. So coming back together with that, I think would give you information to say, does that student need to continue or not? And we'll talk a little bit more about how you'll know in this section 3. That's an excellent question. We also, I think, have it addressed on our FAQs because it has been asked a lot. So you can always look at, go back to that as well.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. I'm going to go into the section 3 because I think we get a lot of questions around the progress monitoring and the progress reviews. So we developed this section to help the team have some guiding questions and considerations when they meet back. So after your plan's developed, the teams should schedule a time to meet back to review the student response. Typically, once you have 6 to 8 data points on your progress monitoring, and that is graphed, the team will have enough information to meet again and determine, is there a positive response? Is the data just so variable that it's questionable? Or are we getting a poor response to this intervention? And so this is a continuous cycle of review, really, until the student reaches their goal and the intervention can be faded. So that kind of addresses Sam's question as well. So on the next slide, we really prefer to have the data graphed because it's so much easier to make determinations. So in this example, we have data graphed with student data. We have the goal line that was set based on the targeted goal. And we are able to get a trend line. So a lot of our progress monitoring tools will offer a graphing program that includes a trend line. Makes it easier to look at a glance to see if the intervention is working or not. If you don't have a trend line, we have a document called a decision rules document that will give them some alternate ways. And one of them is a 4-point decision rule where you can look at the 4 most recent data points to make a decision. But what we want our teams to do is look at the data, determine if there is a positive response and the plan can be faded or exited, or maybe we didn't set the goal at grade level and we need to make a more ambitious goal. Or maybe we were looking at a series of skills and we only targeted one, but there were some other areas we needed to focus on. So there's a lot of considerations if a student has a positive response. That questionable response, when the data is just so variable, we typically would just kind of look for any issues with fidelity that might have impacted the student performance. And then we might give it about 4 more data points to see if we can tell a little bit more when we meet back. And if there's a poor response, we would go through that column and work through, what was the fidelity of implementation? What might be an issue with the fit of the intervention? So we try to make that guidance in that table in that section 3 to give the teams some things to consider and some possible next action steps. And when they do, on the next slide, after they would review and they make an instructional change, we recommend that they make that change on the graph because it will reset the trend line. You will be able to tell if your change was effective. And you can also tell again, you're going to come back and say, is the student on track to meet the goal? And in this example, we really just have a graph that shows a student that was getting an intervention 3 times a week. They changed the intensity by making it a 5-time-a-week intervention. And that was enough to put the student on track. So sometimes when you're looking at students that are not having a positive response to an intervention, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to completely change the intervention. Sometimes we just ask the question, does it need to be intensified in some way? Does he need more time with it? Do we need to lengthen a session? Do we need to make it more frequent? Do we need to increase the change of an interventionist to increase their expertise or change the group size? So that's just kind of the big piece around progress monitoring. And the last section of the plan is where we just have a place to document that we included the parent. Hopefully, if they were part of the meeting, they were part of the problem-solving process. But if not, how are we going to make sure they know what it is that we're going to do? And so who's going to be responsible for that, and how will we do it, and when will that occur? How are we making sure that the parent who wasn't in attendance got that read at home plan and knows what areas to focus on when they try to help their student at home? And then how are we providing that progress report to the parent if they were not there? Section 3 really functions as your progress report. So if they're part of the meeting, they're going to leave with that information documented in the discussion. They'll have the graphs that will show. But if not, how are we going to get that information to them and make sure they understand it? So that's just kind of the basics of our reading improvement plan template. We do have it now in IC, so it can be accessed from the student's PLP tab if they want to have it in IC. If they use the document on our website, it's a little more customizable. And we're fine if they want to tweak it, as long as they keep those essential components in. And then they could upload it in IC so that it can travel with the student. So that was a lot. I'm sorry. I felt like I talked really fast. So what, do you have some questions for me, or any concerns or comments that you'd like to make?
Jan, as they're thinking about the questions, I want to make sure. So I was trying, as I was listening, I was pulling some links for folks. So I put the FAQ in the chat. I put the page that has the 4-step problem solving kind of decision-making tree for them. Is there anything else that you would recommend I go and pull?
There is, and I may have it up. I'd like to pull that decision-making protocol, because it has some graphs that gives an example of four-step decision-making, or that trend line that I think is really helpful. I'm going to pull it off of KYMTSS. I really will tell you that we do encourage people to do this in the context of their multi-tiered system of support. So there are a lot of resources on our KYMTSS site, and that may also be something that if you're not familiar with, you would want to dig into. So let me see if I can. Yeah. That decision rules protocol. And we have a little more time than I thought we were going to have. I do want to, I'm going to share my screen, if y'all don't mind, and just show you a couple of resources. Are you seeing the homepage for KYMTSS?
We are, yes.
We have a lot of good resources on that site that can help people with resources for all areas of our multi-tiered system for our multi-tiered system of support. And so I just wanted to highlight that to you. There's a spot where you can sign up for the newsletter if you don't get it. And so when we release things that may be related to literacy, it'll keep you current. There's a spot where you can click on the newsletter and get posts that are from the previous newsletters and look at the archives. But one of the recent revamps to the site is on the why page. And we decided we really wanted to be clear in how Read to Succeed aligns and is supported by a multi-tiered system of support. And so we set that purpose on this page, but we also make sure that we provided links to resources that really help schools and districts see how that's connected, because that coherence and alignment is so critical, that if we're doing too much in isolation, we're not going to get the outcomes that we want to get. And so you can see a document here that'll really compare the essential elements of MTSS with the Read to Succeed Act. And again, just some resources that I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that could be helpful. So I will stop sharing, and again, any questions that you have. Well, I appreciate the time. Again, please feel free, reach out if you have questions or if you come across something, in your work that you just need a thought partner on or want to brainstorm with. Happy for you to reach out to me at any time.
Thank you so much, Dan. Always appreciate you and the information that you bring. Anybody else have any other comments, questions before we adjourn our meeting?
Christy, just really quickly, could I say something about the Reading Research Center?
Yes, ma'am.
So they are, I put the link in the chat for the center as well. And there is, and I know people can only process so much information in newsletters, but they are going to be putting out information on behalf of educators specifically. So if you go to that link, you can sign up for communications for the center. One of the things that I'm so excited about is that they are going to be building out a clearinghouse that will link together the evidence basis with instructional implications. And, there are just not enough hours of the day for many of us to actively stay abreast of the most current research. And so they are going to take on that charge on our behalf. And then really part of what we want to do in partnership with the agency is to help them to make sure that that's getting into the hands of educators, of parents and families who are interested in that. So I'm very excited about the partnership and all that they're going to bring to literacy across our state. And again, I would love for them to have more of a regular role in this meeting as well, so that you can take forward questions because you are their prime audience. And so just know that that will happen in the future. They were sort of constituted as of July 1. And so it takes much work, as I'm sure you know, to build out a center that has the statutory responsibilities that they do. But they will be leading the RTA evaluation. So you'll hear from them on that. But I want their involvement to be more than that. Like I want it to be actionable for you and very relevant. And so more to come in that space in the coming months. It's exciting.
Very exciting. Thank you, Mickey, for sharing that. All right, if that is it for the day, we've got about 10 minutes to spare, so we'll go ahead and let you have that 10 minutes back. Hopefully, we'll be able to meet again in the spring of next year, and hopefully, all of our members will be able to join us and we can elect a new chair and vice chair and go through those protocols. I hope you have a fantastic holiday season with your friends and family, and please take care. Thanks, guys.